Hey guys, I've continued to receive so many questions about COVID-19, and one that frequently comes up is that of asymptomatic transmission. Those of you that are familiar with my work know that I like to analyse the evidence and go right back to basic scientific principles. Hence, I find the concept of asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19 strange from the start, because no one has even demonstrated symptomatic transmission in a valid experiment. But a microbiologist here in New Zealand has shown me his correspondence with our health authorities as they try to justify the concept of asymptomatic transmission and population-wide controls. Let's see what they've got.
This idea, for example, that you can be ill even though you have no symptoms, and you can be a respiratory virus threat to someone else even though you have no symptoms. That's also invented in 2020. There's simply no history of it, and it defies common sense as well.
I've recently been in communication with Dr. Robin Wakeling, a veteran microbiologist here in New Zealand, who has been previously involved in the development of PCR in forensic analysis. Dr. Wakeling has been concerned that, like many governments, the New Zealand government has been using claims of asymptomatic transmission to justify measures such as lockdowns against entire populations. Dr. Wakeling is a true scientist and has been putting the uncomfortable but crucial questions to the New Zealand health authorities. He's had some rather interesting responses to date, and we'll put these under the spotlight today. By definition, a virus is an infectious particle, and in the case of COVID-19, it is claimed by authorities that it passes between people whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic. This has been the justification for lockdowns, face masks, and mass quarantines. But if the PCR test is not valid for detecting infection in this regard, then how is it being used to demonstrate any kind of transmission at all? If you've seen some of my previous videos or read Virus Mania, you'll see the reasons we give for why PCR tests do not detect an infection per se. They simply detect genetic fragments, and although they might be good at this, further conclusions about what this detection means are limited in this setting. Unfortunately, they were declared a gold standard by unscientific circular reasoning. A test so good it was claimed that it validated itself. Perhaps after convincing people of this, some thought that they could go even further and make their claims for asymptomatic transmission. Anyway, Dr. Wakeling is also fully aware of the limitations of what we can interpret from PCR, as has been fully apparent from my conversations with him and the way he words his questions to the authorities. In fact, with regards to PCR results, he issued the following warning to the government. The media is reporting positive PCR test results as new cases of COVID-19. Could you please explain why such a basic and critical error remains unchecked by government policy? And now let's explore how else he put the New Zealand authorities on the spot, including the responses that he received. One of the questions Dr. Wakeling put to Prime Minister Ardern and Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, New Zealand's Director General of Health, on February 15th regarding an urgent response was as follows. Please provide references for any publications that establish a precedent for isolating populations of asymptomatic, healthy people to control spread of infectious disease. Now, as you might expect, the Prime Minister and Dr. Bloomfield did not respond personally to the question. Dr. Wakeling informs me the Prime Minister's office forwarded the question to Chris Hipkins, the COVID-19 response minister, but his office said that it wasn't his job and forwarded it to the Ministry of Health. Dr. Wakeling finally received an email almost 3 weeks later from the Response and Coordination Team COVID-19 Health System Response. So firstly, it is a rather slow response for an urgent request. Shouldn't the authorities have all their information at their fingertips for their taxpayers and citizens, particularly when it has been the basis for such severe nationwide restrictions? Hopefully there was a good reason for their delay.
Almost every night here there's a wine tasting party.
In any case, let's take a look at how they responded and the evidence they cited for their position. Firstly, they state that most SARS-CoV-2 transmission is spread by people who display some symptoms. However, asymptomatic people also play a role in transmission. And the reference for this is a WHO page that doesn't exist. Okay, they've given a dud link, but if we search the terms, we find that this must be what they are referring to. Now, this appears to be smoke and mirrors. This is not a scientific source document, but a consensus document that is unreferenced, and we are concerned that the ministry is referring to opinions that were put together in early 2020 when far less information was available. In any case, the document provides no evidence about isolating healthy asymptomatic people, and in fact states that asymptomatic infections do not appear to be a major driver of transmission. So reference number 1 is a fail with regards to providing the evidence they claim. Next, the response team states that it is believed that between 17 and 20% of infections are asymptomatic, and they give 2 references. These are actual scientific papers, so at least we might be getting somewhere. Let's have a look at the first reference. You'll see on reading this paper that there are problems all over the place, including numerous modelling assumptions. They say that transmission of asymptomatic infection were estimated to be 6% and 69%, and the credibility of most modelling studies was limited by the absence of external validation. At least the authors admit that most included studies were not designed to estimate the proportion of asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infections and were at risk of selection biases. So the Ministry of Health is referring to a paper that provides no actual evidence of asymptomatic transmission. It's simply speculation based on modelling and an assumption that anyone with a positive PCR is infected. The next reference is just as bad. Another retrospective analysis looking at just 5 selected studies. I found it amusing that they cited this paper though. The authors reported that 1 new case resulted from 305 close contacts of asymptomatic source cases, 0.3%. Even on accepting all the unsubstantiated premises of COVID-19 and how it is diagnosed, 1 case or 0.3% would surely be considered a margin of error result. Now, the ministry don't seem to understand the difference between analytical and diagnostic specificity. So maybe they should watch my video, COVID-19 Behind the PCR Curtain, to get to grips with this. Even with their misunderstanding, they would still have to accept that 1 out of 305 could be a false positive. In any case, it doesn't bode well for building their case for asymptomatic transmission. Next, the response team states that people can also transmit SARS-CoV-2 when they are pre-symptomatic, as levels of virus in the body multiply before the onset of symptoms. Wow, that's a huge claim, and I don't know how they plan to back this one up. Not looking promising for them with this first citation because the methodology in the study is clustering. As you may know, we exposed the problem of using clustering in the latest edition of Virus Mania. It may give investigators some leads, but is in no way actual evidence that transmission has taken place. The clusters described in this particular study include people who went to the same church at different times. Fatally for this paper, it states that all cases in this report were confirmed by polymerase chain reaction only. Asymptomatic persons were not routinely tested. Okay, so the case definition is simply a positive PCR test, but people without symptoms were not being tested, so we have no control group as such. Hence, it is complete speculation that is being employed rather than the scientific method. Okay, on to the second reference they provide for their big claim. This one looks suspicious from the outset. I have looked at other papers comparing PCR results and days of illness, and they are all over the place. Detected one day, then not the next. In fact, as a little segue, this paper came out in early 2020, and as you can see, even hospitalized cases of claimed COVID-19 have PCR results that look like a drunkard's walk. Half the time, the PCR results were negative, and they could oscillate between negative and positive within 24 hours. You'll also see that most so-called positives required cycle thresholds above 30. Do they have COVID-19 one day and then not the next? Which results are we supposed to use? But going back to the response team citation, our authors have produced a smooth line purporting to show viral load being highest at the start of the illness and then decaying away. Now, I don't believe there is evidence that allows you to conclude cycle thresholds equate to so-called viral load. Again, that is beyond what PCR does, although you'll often see this claim. However, let's accept the premise and analyse it from there. Can you see a problem on the charts? There are virtually no cycle threshold data points for the first few days, which has highly skewed the data, and many subsequent thresholds are actually very erratic. Others have already noted this, and in response to the study, two critiquing analysts pointed out that the authors proposed that virus titers would peak at or prior to symptom onset. However, visual inspection of individual viral load tracings appears to refute this interpretation. They also commented that a request for viral shedding data was denied by the Guangzhou 8th People's Hospital. They go on to point out that studies modelling would predict that infectiousness is low at the time of symptom onset, but continuously increases to infinity with increasing time before symptom onset, which is not a plausible infectiousness profile. Did the ministry even look properly at this poor quality paper, which has been shown to make implausible claims? Could it be they are just reading the abstracts without further analysis? And why would they claim it provides the evidence that Dr. Wakeling requested? He certainly wasn't fooled by their citations and sent them the following response. I checked 4 of the sentence citation combinations at random, and I cannot find any specific link between the citation and the sentence to which it is attached, a basic requirement of Level 2 NCEA science. For those of you outside New Zealand, that is high school level science. My personal thoughts on asymptomatic transmission is that it has been promoted alongside a dazzling array of buzzwords and mantras such as flatten the curve, social distancing, super spreaders, and so forth. All of them have had dramatic effects in scaring people into compliance, but have no sound scientific basis in how they have been applied with the current situation. Asymptomatic transmission may also have been used as a convenient explanation after the fact. For example, when a new case seems to pop out of nowhere. There are other explanations, but I guess they don't conform to the narrative. Now, Dr. Wakeling also put other juicy questions to the authorities with regards to the validity of PCR tests, lockdowns, and vaccines. Luckily, they've put down their justifications on paper for us, and there's plenty of interesting claims to go through, so stay posted for more videos. In the meantime, Dr. Wakeling has urged that other citizens feel empowered to formally ask their governments whether the evidence for their actions actually exists. Let's get this out in the open for a proper discussion. But for the final word, we'll let Dr. Fauci chime in on the issue.
In all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks.
To help sustain my channel in this time of censorship, please support my work on Subscribestar. Link is in the description.